And so today we're going to talk about the Broadband Infrastructure Improvement Grants. We call it 2.0. Last year we called it, BIIG, which is the acronym for Broadband Infrastructure Improvement Grant. This year's 2.0. We call it bigger as well. And so hopefully, this is a second opportunity. So today we'll talk. I'll talk a little bit about how we got here, what this opportunity entails, some of the work that we've done behind the scenes to really try to make a difference here for some of these hard-to-connect sites. And then we'll also have some other colleagues here join me in the presentation. This is a very fluid presentation. This is your opportunity to ask questions. So please feel free to do so. We don't need to wait till we get to the end of the presentation. We want to make this as interactive as possible. We are recording this session, so we can make it available afterwards for the rest of the service provider community. One of the things that at least I was personally interested this year around was making sure that we spent enough time with the service provider community so that they understand exactly what we're trying to do. We're all on the same page about what we expect, and that we can get some favorable results moving forward. With that, I probably want to go ahead and introduce, this is our agenda. And again, this is just a few things we'll talk about. The overview of BIIG, talk about the key considerations, focused on some of the key timelines. And then we'll actually go in and dive into the request for proposal document, so you guys have a sense of what that looks like. And then obviously questions, Q&A, but again, the Q&A can be done throughout the presentation. So again, I introduced myself, Luis. I want to also introduce from Cato High Speed Network, Terry Sanders. She's our Chief Operating Officer. So Terry is the brains and the person that really makes things happen. So Terry. I also want to introduce Ed Smith from Scenic. And so most of you know Ed. And Ed is, this whole work could not be done without Scenic. Scenic is the network operator for the Research and Education Network in California. And we're really happy to have the support from Scenic and make sure that we can get this work done properly. I also want to introduce a colleague and a support person, Kathy Benham. So Kathy is one of our E-rate consultants, and she's also been very instrumental in making sure that we can design a process that allows us to leverage on E-rate and CTF, which is really, really important for us as we move forward. So how do we get here? In the last couple of years, if you guys have been involved in the first process, but in the last couple of years, we really have been in a lot of conversations with folks in Sacramento, some of the control agencies. Schools have moved into a new, or transitioning into a new set of standards, a Common Core standards, and along with that comes how students are being assessed in their knowledge. And so along with the Common Core came a new accountability system and assessment system. California was pretty aggressive and moved completely towards computer-based assessments. And when that happened, it made us realize that there were some gaps in the school's infrastructure to make sure that they were able to test. While testing is a big driver, and testing drives test scores, and it drives a lot of other big picture things. It's funny because the assessment system in general doesn't drive a lot of the need in terms of bandwidth, but it does change it to it really is a mission critical type of application. So it changes the nature of how we think about making sure this infrastructure is in place. So as we spoke with folks in Sacramento, we as a program provided a perspective on some of the schools that we knew that had technical difficulties to connect. So we conceived a program that would help remove a lot of those barriers, and I'll talk a little bit about what those barriers were. Last year, we did a program. It was one-time dollars. The governor was gracious enough to support us and provide $27 million, and this year there's $50 million to be able to help out with this issue. AB 93 was the assembly bill that was part of the Budget Act, and that provided our program $50 million to distribute and to try to find solutions for these hard to connect sites. So again, the purpose of BIIG was really to help remove some of these big barriers that some of the schools were facing. Some of you know that connecting rural communities or schools is a very hard endeavor, and usually what it means for companies like you guys, the service provider community, is that in some cases there's just not the business case to build out there, and that's a pretty obvious one. But one of the other things we realized is that some of these schools not only don't have, the market's not there, they just don't have the resources to do this work. They don't have the resources to even understand what needs to be done, the technical expertise. A lot of these schools have very low student populations. They might be from 10 students, even 5 students to 40 students. And so the administrator there is the superintendent, is the teacher, is the bus driver, is the cafeteria person. They do everything. And so anyway, the expertise and technical knowledge is lacking. A lot of them also don't understand the E-rate program. So E-rating, as you know, is complicated and is always changing. Of course, geographical barriers. In some cases, California is so large and diverse in territory that we all know that, I'm preaching to the choir here, but, there are some places that are really, really hard to connect. One of the great things that BIIG was able to do is really connect with the legislative folks, with the governor's office, and with some of these control agencies, and they're really, really interested in participating and being part of this process. So when we started having conversations, they tasked us to look at a process where we could leverage the dollars as best we can, that we could we conceive a grant process that could really go down and deliver this connectivity. In the K-12 space, it's not uncommon to see grants where, the money's being distributed out and sent to schools. But again, for those obvious reasons I explained, giving the money to the districts and then coming back and then doing the work was really something we felt that was not going to be able to happen. So, we developed a process where we could handhold them through the whole procurement process, where we could leverage E-rate and CTF, where we could put all that technical expertise, bundled into the whole process, where we could prioritize the schools and prioritize the funding, making sure that we could focus on the schools that have the least amount of capacity out, in their areas. And so, we did that and, focused on the last mile. One of the things that, was a concern from the governor's office is, well, okay, we fixed the last mile issue, but what about internal connectivity? And so while we understand that there might be issues beyond the last mile, we felt that the last mile was really going to be the hardest component to fix, and that's what we can focus. Last year, we actually kept it very narrow. We said last mile, and we actually ended up saying, all the minimum threshold was the 20 kilobits per second. Whichever school was below that threshold, we basically were the ones that we moved forward. In this round, we've expanded that definition or broadened the criteria so that we could actually bring more sites into the process. And quite frankly, this process hasn't been done in any other state. So for all of us, it was really more of a learning experience as well. So believe me, we learned a lot of things the hard way. So we hope to incorporate a lot of those learning outcomes and make sure that we fine-tune this process this year to make sure that we're more effective. This is a big thing. The last bullet. So these are one-time funds, and so we want to make sure that you guys understand that ultimately the schools are the ones that are going to be paying the ongoing costs. So we are really trying to make sure that the ongoing cost moving forward is the lowest for the schools. And you'd be surprised, even on round one, even though the monthly recurring cost was what we expected to see, some schools came back and said, no, we just can't afford that. And you go back to these schools that have very low student populations, 5 to 10 students. Their funding is largely based on student counts. So there's this balance that we really need to find. So once we go through this process, what we do is we present the LEAs with the outcome. We go through the selection process as based on the RFP. We recommend the provider, and we basically show them the costs. We show them what the grant would pay, which are the one-time costs, the non-recurring costs, the special construction costs, and then we present with them the monthly recurring costs. So at that point in time, they sign an agreement with us that they, agree to the terms that they want to move forward, and then we, once we do the contract, we supersede the responsibility of the contractor. Yeah. So any questions so far? Pretty good. So here, I think, are some of the key points that we, we want to emphasize as we move forward. Because again, these are one-time funds, so these were really catered to paying for special construction costs. Last year, when we went through the process, there were some very high construction costs in some cases. There was one school in Gatsby, California, where the bid came very high, extremely high, probably around the 7-digit numbers, and so $9 million. And it tells a story. I mean, these sites are really remote, isolated, and hard to connect. So we're really trying to find solutions for it. By the way, we didn't fund that. That didn't make any fiscal sense. And for that amount of money, they said, well, maybe we give scholarship to these 11 students that are out there, and they'll probably be better off, right? But certainly want to make sure we make some prudent decisions. Said that, this time around, the legislatures had some concerns about some thresholds and some checks and balances. And so one of the things that they instituted this year, along with the budget bill language of AB 93, is that any bill that would require a cost of $1,000 per student, where it's going to go through an extra layer of approval. So basically, it'll go back to the Department of Finance and it'll go to the Legislative Budget Committee, so that they can evaluate and review those bills. This has a very aggressive timeline. So obviously, the timeline is very well aligned with E-rate. And one of the things we have this year that we didn't have last year is that E-rate is also going through a lot of changes. We're already experiencing some glitches with their system. And so we want to make sure that we give everybody, including ourselves, enough time to make sure that we can process all the forms and can anticipate, hopefully, any glitches and have time to fix those. Capacity to promptly install solutions will be an important decision factor. So we are weighing heavily the capacity to put these connections in as soon as possible. So Ed will talk a little bit about that as we talk along this presentation. So funds are available for immediate use, meaning that once contracts are signed, we would expect folks that they can start working on this. This would be especially true for the very hard to connect sites. We have 45 sites that are just way out there, and there's no infrastructure for these schools. So I think the sooner we can start, the better. And again, the awarded circuits will be superseded to the corresponding school district. So some key differences from last year. Last year we basically had transport circuits only. We were requesting the connection from point A to point B. And what we did this year on the first round is that we're purchasing all the equipment outside of E-rate and paying, full freight for the year. This year, what we want to try to do is incorporate bundled services, since they are eligible for Priority 1 service under E-rate funding. So this will help us leverage the extended funding, additional funding, to be able to at least pay for some part of the equipment for the transport circuits within E-rate. Said this, the schools might need some other equipment beyond that, and so the grant would also help pay for some of this one-time sites. Last year, again, we focused on schools that had less than 20 kilobits per second, which is the minimum amount of capacity needed for the actual testing. We all know that that's a very low benchmark, and we're seeing more. In fact, there's organizations out there that have put forth some recommendations of how much bandwidth per student needs to be out there for teaching and learning. So those are a little different. This year we did 3 priorities: less than 20 kilobits, less than 100, and then less than 1,000 kilobits per student. And we're going to put it in 3 priority buckets. And we'll look at funding Priority 1 first, and if there's money left over, we'll look at Priority 2, and we'll look at Priority 3 sites. Last year, for the most part, we did point-to-point connections. We weren't really sure about what schools had out there, and even though we received bids for shared connections and aggregation types of strategies from their products, it didn't really give us enough time to work with the schools to understand what is it that they had in place. This time around, we did introduce a separate step where we looked at if the schools were using some kind of aggregation technology already, and so we specified there what the preference is. But you can certainly now, bid both cloud aggregation and point-to-point. So we should have a better grasp on that piece. Last year, this was kind of something that really hurt us a bit. It's we had a preferred Z location in the Exhibit B where we list the A and Zs. And then we left it open for the providers to put an alternate Z location. And in some cases, that created a lot of problems, because we didn't have much options to the preferred Z location, and then the Z location that was provided by the service provider was not the most ideal Z location. So we had to do a lot of Z location changes, and that wasn't a good situation to be in. So in this case, we're going to make it very prescriptive in terms of what is the desired Z location, so that we can avoid some of those issues. Now, when it comes to charter schools, and this is something that I'll talk about, we are going to allow you guys more flexibility in terms of Z location, because charters are a little bit unique in terms of how they operate, where they operate from, and they certainly have different needs, and they're different from the traditional school setting. What we're seeing with charter schools is that they're highly mobile. They're usually leased facilities. They operate from non-traditional spaces. They might operate from churches, from malls. They might be co-located with a school. So that's a little challenging when you're trying to make sure that they have adequate connectivity and with those types of conditions. So the charter is going to be unique. We'll actually rely a lot on you guys to help us determine what can be done with charters in terms of aggregating charter schools and then sending one connection back to their main office, and then connecting their main office back to a K-12 aggregation node. Dark fiber solutions. So, again, with changes to E-rate, we are looking at leveraging dark fiber solutions as best we can. We certainly, it's always a preference, if we have someone that can manage and maintain the fiber, but we also are looking at if there are no other options, should we consider a self-provision network? Because believe me, we've tried for many, many years, and these usual suspects keep coming up on the list. So I think it's really fine. The other thing I want to emphasize, and it's not part of this slide. I don't think we're going to see dedicated money again for broadband infrastructure. This is the second year, and I think we all need to leverage this opportunity. And so leverage, the changes that are happening on E-rate. Not only that, E-rate, we don't know, with potential new administration coming in, if these changes in the E-rate world will stay. So I think that we're in a very good spot right now to make sure we can leverage one-time influx of E-rate dollars and also one-time influx of state dollars to get these sites connected.
Just a quick question.
Yes.
So the top bullet point there on your BIIG 2.0, it talks about transport and CPE.
Yes.
Is that customer-provided equipment or carrier-provided equipment?
That is, I understand that's customer premise equipment. So that's the device that you would provide as a handoff to the school.
Managed router or whatever type of device on the edge.
So does that first bullet basically say we're looking for transport and DIA? So then
you'll have the option to do transport only,
okay,
or if you also want to do CPE. Now, obviously, if we can include the CPE, for us it's better, right? Because we can leverage E-rate.
So I just want to clarify, when you say DIA, you're talking about direct internet access?
Dedicated internet access?
I don't think they're looking for that. They're looking for transport with a terminating device on premise that's owned and managed by you guys.
So you're providing basically layer one with an edge device on the end for management.
Thank you.
Well said.
So to stay on that subject, the CPE that's provided by the service provider, is the district going to be able to use that? Is it just as a handoff to the districts or the school's network, or are they going to be able to also use that?
No, it's just a handoff, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Kathy made sure that we had a slide just for that piece, right? Because we want to be very clear about that. Last year, we started with 304 sites. At the end of the day, with BIIG 1, we're connecting 170 sites. A lot of sites withdrew. They have their own solutions. Some, couldn't bear with the monthly recurring costs, and there were a lot of numerous factors. Some had were in contracts they just couldn't get out, or it was a high cost to get out of their existing contract. So that was a bit unfortunate in terms of not being able to leverage this opportunity because of the contracts. This year round, we have, we brought in the criteria, so we have close to 600 sites that are moving forward. Yes, Mike.
Based on what you just said, would it be safe to assume that some of the sites that maybe didn't participate last year might participate this year again?
There's a few, yes.
Can you repeat the question, please?
So Mike asked if would it be safe to assume that some sites that were part of this but didn't move forward with a connection are participating in this site count, and the answer is yes. So key things for you guys: receive actionable proposals for qualified vendors. Talked about this a lot. Leveraging. Oh, so this is a key point, and this goes back to your question about direct internet access. The state's invested a lot of money in the state infrastructure, and so we are making sure we want to leverage that state infrastructure. So that's why we're not looking at connectivity directly to the internet. That would probably be a last resort type of option, unless it's really cost prohibitive to get the connectivity down to a K-12 node. We would certainly entertain a connection out directly to the internet. But I'll talk a little bit more about that in a further slide on why we think that way. So again, leverage E-rate and CTF and the subsidy programs that are out there. Leverage a lot of this one-time investment. Again, we want to see the special construction cost, the true cost up front, so that the grant could help absorb that cost, and then moving forward, the schools could, have the lowest monthly cost. What we don't want to see is the special construction cost amortized in the MRC, because that's really not what we're trying to do here. And that's another big thing here. 5, looking for scalable solutions. One of the things we want to do is not try to solve the connectivity issue, but we also want to make sure that moving forward, schools can increase capacity as they need. We want to position them so that they don't have to do these large investments again in future years to try to get connectivity in place. So, i.e. fiber solutions, or, point-to-point microwave might be another possibility. What we want to make sure is that they can scale up without huge investments.
Really quick question. On the P1 bundle, would that be the same that you don't have the equipment advertised in that?
It would be, from an E-rate perspective, it
Right.
is, but I didn't know.
That's an interesting question.
That's where we come to the 67% rule. The cost of the equipment can't exceed a certain threshold versus the first year cost. So,
We can wait till that slide. I just don't
Okay.
know. Okay, thanks.
That's a great question. So the state network, again, I talked about the state network. This is usually the hierarchy of the network. You have the classroom connected to the school wing, to the school side, and the school side to the district office, and then the district office to a K-12 aggregation node. For the most part, those K-12 node sites that you see close to the end are usually the county offices of education, and in some cases it could be a district or high school. We have about 85 aggregation nodes throughout California, and then in turn, those aggregation nodes connect to CalREN, which, there's about 14 to 15 locations throughout the state that help us connect to the higher transit system. We are seeking proposals for transport to these locations, usually from the school side to the district office, or from the district office to the county office. Again, while we would consider, proposals connected directly to the internet, would probably be outside of the E-rate process. And again, this is important. In some cases with BIIG 1, we ran into situations where, in the surface, it looked like a connection directly to the internet would be much cheaper. But what happens is that the districts have a lot of their services come from the district office. So support for SIS systems, accounting, tax support. So from a service delivery perspective, this is why we follow this hierarchy. And, a lot of these schools don't have capacity to even have support, so they use these connections not only for internet access, but they, do troubleshooting and make sure that things are running well in the school. So as much as we can, we want to continue to keep this hierarchy and make sure that schools get the services that they need.
May I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
I know last year, of course, we had multiple Z locations for, say, 1A location. I know that's being phased out this year to it's a one-on-one relationship. But there are all the aggregation hub sites. If we can get to an aggregation hub site easier and more economically than to whatever you've presented in the RFP, I would assume that's a good option. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So what you could do there is you could provide as an alternate bid, for an alternate aggregation strategy for those sites.
Okay.
And we certainly entertain that. Obviously, we want to be prudent with funds, make sure that we can try to find a solution for it.
So will the list of aggregation hub sites be provided in the RFP as it was similarly, or?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. So we'll still have an option
Okay.
to do it through the regular process. It does require an NDA.
Yep.
Most of you guys have an NDA already.
But that's not the preferred,
Right.
that's not the preferred Z location in this project.
Right.
Yeah.
But if it's challenging for one of us to get to the preferred Z location, we just want to know that there's an option.
We want to make that the exception,
Right.
not the rule. Like we kind of did that. So we want to avoid those types of situations as best we can.
Yeah, I think we much prefer that you take a circuit back to the county office, one of the K-12, they can send note sites rather than directly to CalRent, to the backbone.
Part of the issue with CalRent, the CalRent hub sites are usually, in places where there's a lot of carriers in, and then as you know, space is limited, power is limited, and remote hands is limited. So county offices serve that role very well in districts because you have more of those throughout the state, and they usually have the technical expertise at hand to be able to.
Yeah, I was just thinking about obviously there's going to be build cost to get to the A location, but if there's also a build cost to get to the preferred C location, that there's an option to minimize that expense if necessary. So I think I understand. Thank you.
Overview of the timeline. So, hey, we didn't know we were going to get more funds. We thought we were done with BIIG, and so the governor did signal in January that there might be another opportunity. So they had a placeholder there, $100 million initially. And after they saw what we could accomplish with the first round of funding, there was some negotiation there with the legislature, and so we ended up with $50 million. But that left us a little time to reconceive the grant process and talk about what we've learned and how we can incorporate those. We streamlined that application process. Last year we had 3 phases. This year we consolidated to 1 phase, so we had an application window open for about a month. The last couple of weeks have been pretty intense, in terms of trying to make sure we collected all the information and screened the number of sites that met the criteria, and make sure that we had an RFP built to be able to go out to bid. RFP window. This is the window that you have to put your bids together, and we've done our best to try to give you enough time to get some of these bids in. And then, in December and January, we'll look at analyzing all the data and, compiling everything and make sure that we can do a scoring and ranking and then present the information to the state agencies so that we can make some decisions. Announcements, I believe that should be February, not January. I forgot to update that one, but January is probably when we're going to look at presenting this information to the stakeholders. This is when that process of, if there are any other bids that exceed $1,000 per student in terms of investment, that we have those conversations with these stakeholders up in Sacramento. Execution of contracts, we'll talk a little bit about that on the RFP. One of the things that we changed in the RFP is that we are going to ask for time for some contract language as part of the response. I think that's how we framed it, right?
Yeah.
So we want to start, we don't want to wait till, we're getting ready to, February, March timeframe to start looking at contracts. We want to start looking at that contract language in advance so that it gives us time to make sure those contracts are executed correctly. And then as soon as we have contracts, we should really start the process. Supersedure effective date. What we want to do is we want to make sure we do an orderly transition of these contracts to the schools. So, in BIIG, the first round, we were expecting to supersede the contracts as soon as this next June 30th. But in some cases, they're still not even in place. So we might have to, wait another year to supersede those contracts. So what I'm trying to say is we're trying to supersede as quickly as we can, but we understand that we don't want to miss the E-rate cycle, so we want to make sure that
And I know this year, like you said, it's a little different, but is there a group that's working, I understand, with Scenic and yourselves and coming up with the
yes.
supersedure and what you're
Absolutely. So what we'll do there is what we're doing this year is any contract, any circuit that has been delivered before the end of this calendar year will be superseded for July 1st of 2016.
and I can take this offline, but it would be a contract that we'd have to then provide to that local team, but there's also some information you guys. So
We'll
it's a
we'll help
joint
you
effort.
coordinate that. So we
Okay,
have a
thank you.
team at Scenic, it'll be Cassandra, and from our team, it'll be Rachel White. And obviously, Kathy's going to help us if required in terms of making sure we can coordinate the contract language and the specific items that we need the cost and all those things.
Again, I should take this offline from you, so that we can get prepared and I can get legal to review it and have it done. Is it something that I can proactively reach out to
Sure.
Rachel White and Cassandra and see?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, and by the way, we do know that this is kind of awkward where we have a bidders conference and the RFP, just came out. So we were supposed to post it yesterday. We had some technical difficulties, but I believe it's posted, right?
Yes, it is. Online.
So it is posted. Now, you're used to seeing the scenic RFPs. There are some slight variances. Obviously, I think that a key one is, usually the typical scenic RFPs would send circuits to the scenic aggregation sites. I think the big difference here is the scoring rubric, where we have a different criteria. And then two, a lot of these circuits are really going to school districts and county offices and schools. They're not really going to scenic county sites. So this is kind of, I talked a little bit about this, once we get the input from you guys, there'll be a technical team within Scenic that'll help us look at each of your proposals and help us figure out what are the best options out there. We'll have a panel of reviewers, and these will be subject matter experts around the state that'll help us put another lens of review through this whole process. We'll explain what we went through, all the bids that we received, and how we concluded that these were the best options. And then we'll present those to stakeholders around January, February. And then once we have all those pieces lined up, then we'll make sure that we're into contract execution mode. So back to last year, I want to make sure we put this slide here. We still have 45 schools that we have no solutions for. Last year, when we concluded the E-rate process, we ended up with 64 schools on the list, and we found solutions for 19 schools. Some we were able to get through the E-rate process, some we had to do outside the E-rate process, and we had to do that because of the timing. We wanted to make sure that we could get them connected as soon as possible. So what we're doing this time around is we're putting back those schools, but we do want to emphasize that these are our highest priorities. We still have some funding from the previous year that is earmarked towards making sure that these schools, we find a solution for them.
Are these called out anywhere in the RFP as the top priorities?
Great. We'll see. Well, in Exhibit D, we actually, we'll see in Exhibit D. We'll show you.
So technically, there's a little bit more than the $50 million because there's some funds left over from last year, if it covers this subset of schools. Great.
Yes.
Do those schools still have the $1,000 per student?
In this round, they would. In this round, they would. But again, I think that, and I'm not seeing that as really as a barrier, quite frankly. It's just a check and balance. It's a check. It's one of those things as it passes a reasonable test, right? Yeah.
So I think we could elaborate on that a little bit. We worked very closely in round one with stakeholders, Department of Finance, State Board of Education, and California Department of Education. They were at the table with us, and they saw us expend significantly more than $1,000 per student for some of the sites. The Legislative Analyst's Office really did not want to write our program a blank check and say, go to town and do whatever you want with $100 million. So Legislative Analyst's Office, whose influence caused them to put a limit in there. And if we're going to expend more than $1,000 per student, the process is we sit with those same stakeholders, they look at it, they say we agree, and we give a budget committee in the legislature a 30-day notice period. It's not really an approval that they have to say yes, but they get notice, and 30 days from that point, we can proceed with the contract.
Just to give you a perspective, last year the average I think was about close to $1,000 per student. So it wasn't a number that just came out of that deal. In average.
A few a little more, a few a little less.
Yeah. So this is how BIIG 2.0 is looking like at this point in time. You know, we received applications for 1,080 schools roughly in that month period. And so when we looked at strictly the priorities, we ended up with 598 sites. So now let me emphasize a key point here. 598 sites is, you look at the underconnected category, you have 226. At this point in time, we're not saying that we're going to fund the 598. We're exploring solutions for the 598. And again, we're going to look at funding priority 1. You know, that's 121 sites. That includes those 45 sites that we talked about, you know, that we have no bids for. So that's why it says includes and no bids. So, you know, we're trying to make sure we manage expectations well, not only with the service provider community, but also with the school districts, because in some cases we strictly adhere to, you know, do they meet the minimum thresholds? And then we'll take a look at as how, you know, they come in terms of cost and everything, that we'll make sure that we fund them. So you'll look at, you know, 598, you look at priority 1 sites, those are that have less than 20 kilobits per student. So those are really the lowest in terms of capacity. Priority 2, sites that have less than 100 kilobits per second per student, 187. Now 2B is that they might have, you know, they're part of priority 2, but we felt that based on what they reported, might not have a scalable solution. Okay, so you'll look at those in the Exhibit D. They're all the sites are going to be marked on which priority they are, so that way you guys can focus and, you know, choose whichever sites make sense for you based on your capacity and your infrastructure, and you can prioritize your time. So Exhibit D has all those columns, so that you actually put some filters in there, and you could, you know, filter by county, by district, by priority, by the preferred technology, and that way gives you some little more tools to make sure you focus your resources where you think is more advantageous.
Quick question. There's a number of schools that are priority 3.
Yes.
So what is that?
Priority 3 is what we call the underconnected category, and those are the sites that we have to put a cut point, which was less than 1,000 kilobits per student. So these probably have good infrastructure, but they just don't have enough capacity. And this mostly applies to the school district's connections. What we're seeing is that some of their schools might have a good capacity, but as you start going upstream, they just don't have the capacity. So the schools that you'll see underconnected might already have a scalable solution, but they do need to make sure that they have that capacity as they move forward to be able to be successful.
And they're the last priority. The other folks need to be taken care of first.
You want to talk a little? You want to hand this off to you?
Oh, sure.
We're kind of winging it here, but.
Is this presentation also going to be posted to either the K12HSN site or Chinix site?
Yes. Okay. That's great. You don't have to.
The slide deck and a recording.
Great.
And then all your questions, we're taking them right now, and then we'll update the FAQ at the CNIC website, so that way everybody has access to the questions.
Okay. Good morning. I'm going to talk a little bit about the modernization and E-rate program. The FCC went through a huge rulemaking process last year where they did some significant changes to the program, and I hope that many of you are already well aware of these changes, but we're going to talk about some of them that apply to this project. One is in the second modernization order. The FCC actually recognized the BIIG process as one of its opportunities to provide matching funds for special construction. And it's really critical, and we'll go over this in the Exhibit D, that the FCC has clearly defined what special construction qualifies for these matching funds. And it really, truly is only construction and upgrading, constructing new facilities and upgrading facilities. So in the bidding process, we're asking that you identify those costs as separated from other non-recurring costs that might also be eligible, because we want to be able to identify which of those qualify for the matching funds from the FCC. Another change is that the amortization of special construction, that rule has been suspended. So the FCC is willing to essentially fund the E-rate discounted portion for special construction and one-time costs all in the first year, which is really huge. So I know many of you have done amortization, and many school districts would ask for that because it made a lot of financial sense. But in this case, in fact, I think the program does not want any type of amortization. They want to see what the true upfront costs are so that the recurring costs will be lower for the school districts. And dark fiber is now eligible. It's treated essentially the same as lit or managed service. So while I think in this particular application, obviously the program, I think, is looking for managed solutions, but they are open for those sites that really have not received viable bids year after year at looking at dark fiber solutions as well as potentially self-construction.
Right. You know, it's not our preferred. You know, we don't need to manage those things. It's probably better, but again, we're getting to a point where we probably just need to consider those, all options.
So would an IRU term be acceptable for playing in dark fiber space?
Yeah, absolutely. That's preferable.
Well, right. Yeah, but just confirming, because
yes,
everything else you're trying to get small MRC and NRCs up front. So trying to make sure.
And how they look at it, the FCC looks at it, they look at IRU as separate from a self-provision, which is outright ownership.
Right.
So when we look at the Exhibit D, we actually have it broken out for pricing.
Yeah, and then self-provision is not like you can. You have to really make a case for the self-provision under the E-rate rule. So you really have to make sure you can demonstrate that it's the most cost-effective solution, that you've compared it to what the fiber services would look at. So it's not trivial, but you know, I guess there's nothing out there we would certainly consider.
So, point of clarification for dark fiber. In the case, with the way your design was set up earlier, where you go from CalRen and then out to the hub sites, and then you go into the county and then into the district and then into the buildings, is a dark fiber solution getting from, say, the district office to the school building an acceptable access method, even though that may be more of an MRC versus an IRU basically a fiber extension access method to go literally across the street in a lot of these cases that we're talking about, so we're not deploying as much gear and keeping costs down.
Right. So that is absolutely acceptable.
Okay.
Anytime that fiber crosses the right-of-way, that is considered Category 1 versus Category 2. So, yeah. So in some cases, it is either the campuses could be very close together, or they could be from the DO to the school many miles.
Right. Yeah. So depending on the environment, but just trying to understand if that's a valid option that we can present.
Yes, absolutely. And then modulating electronics, I think, is another big feature.
Right. So we're in that. The program is going to be going out to bid for the modulating electronics, which are now eligible under Category 1. That's going to be out on a separate RFP.
But this is for node sites, yeah, and you might be some of these sites.
Right. I'm sure the same group of bidders is bidding on the node sites as well. Okay. So in essence, this is straight from the eligible services list that was just published about 3 weeks ago. Again, for managed lit services as well as dark fiber solutions, all non-recurring costs are eligible. But again, we're asking for any of the special construction costs for new facilities or upgraded facilities to be differentiated in your non-recurring costs so that we know which of the costs will be eligible for the state matching funds.
I'm sorry. Can you give an example of what a non-recurring cost would be different from special construction costs?
I suppose oftentimes we just see like an installation charge where you're having techs go out and do installation and configuration. I don't know, Ed, do you have any other examples?
No, I mean, that's the real differentiation from my perspective. It's the, a non-recurring installation charge versus the actual upgrading of equipment, central offices, and fiber infrastructure.
It varies, something like cross connect, it could be administrative charges.
Okay.
So basically, as a service provider, the CapEx that we're outlaying, whether it's new or upgrade to get to the school, that would be a special construction, as opposed to, let's say, NRC, someone going in there and doing the installation.
One
Correct.
time, exactly.
Right.
Correct. And both costs are eligible. One is just eligible for the match from the FCC. So for a 90% school, 95% of that cost is going to be paid through the E-rate program. And the other 5% is going to be paid through the grant program.
Yeah, so that's a key change this year for the special construction category. Let's say it's $100,000 for special construction. If it's a 90% district, E-rate will put in the 90%, and because this is these $50 million are considered state matching funds because the state is putting those dollars. We put 50% of the 10%, and then the feds will match another 5%. So in essence, the applicant would pay $0, right?
Oh, so they match another 5 on top.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. And this is why we need to now have it separate, special construction versus one-time costs.
Because it's how you're getting your federal funds to decrease the amount of spend on your state funds, so your state funds can go further.
Exactly. There we go. Further leveraging the subsidy program. So this is, again, this is why this is a very unique opportunity.
It is, because that really, that makes your budget more than 10 times as powerful as it was before,
Exactly.
because you now have federal funding to cover a lot of the expense so that you're minimizing the state dollars going into each side. Awesome.
Exactly the point. This is why it's so complicated.
Good timing.
This is why we couldn't. This is one of the reasons why we just couldn't distribute the money out there, because it would have been diluted. And so we want to make sure that we have this process in place.
One more question. In regards to his question about the IRU, so traditionally, our company, if we were to lease our fiber to somebody, it was $1 million to construct, and we charge them $500 MRC. We would do $1 million up front NRC, $500 MRC. If they want to do an IRU, we just do one lump sum of, say, 1.8 million or whatever. In this case, for an IRU, we would have to break out how much of that is special construction versus the remaining IRU portion. Thank you.
And is there any recurring M&O?
Right.
I think, yeah.
Maintenance
And
and
it's
all that would be included also.
Right, and so you'll see in Exhibit D how we've separated columns, so you can specify that pricing is separate. We can all see it. Anything here? Oh, the Tennessee test. Yeah, you want to talk about this one.
So on-premise equipment is part of a managed Category 1 service. The equipment really is your equipment. You own it, you maintain it. It can never be given to the school district. The school district's local area network has to operate completely independently of your on-premise equipment. This is a long-standing rule. This has been around since about 2000. So again, hopefully many of you are familiar with what we call the Tennessee test. This is the order that resulted in these rules from the FCC.
Did someone go to jail in Tennessee?
No, but, oh, Terry, it's a long, convoluted story, what happened in Tennessee. But let's just say that's where the FCC did make the demarcation between Category 1 and Category 2. What is internal connections, local area network equipment versus Category 1 bundles. So these are the basic criteria that they must meet. Now, the FCC suspended its amortization rule on amortizing special construction over $500,000. They really didn't address CPE, so I think that's pretty interesting. So in my mind, it's still a little bit of a gray area. But if you anticipate the cost of that equipment is going to exceed 67% of your total cost for that service for the first year, we need to know that because the FCC limits the eligibility. Now, we'll see how often that happens, but that is the rule. So if you have any questions about that, please submit some questions to us via the email, and we will attempt to address it. But I haven't run across this situation in a very, very long time. So, but we did want to make sure that we addressed it in this particular instance.
Quick question concerning CPE, and my understanding is the intent of this is to not only get them the capacity they need today, but also give them a future upgrade path for higher bandwidth 3-5 years down the road, whatever that looks like, to go from a 1 gig to a 10 gig or whatever that looks like at the time. That higher bandwidth unit for CPE is where your costs start going way up really fast. So it's not what they need now, it's what they need in the future that maybe is more of a CPE problem. So for now, worry about what they need for now and cross that other bridge when we come to it.
Sure.
Okay.
I think on the Exhibit D, we did ask for pricing at 100 gig and 10 gig consumption.
So you'll see several tiers of pricing, and if you want to actually add your specific tier of pricing, you can add that. Also, we provided a column with the enrollment, so you have an idea of the size of the school, so you get size and resolution of that.
Oh, thank you. That's great.
That was one of the other questions, because that also impacts that dollars per student and some of that kind of calculation.
Exactly.
When we're trying to pull numbers.
Exactly.
Awesome.
But don't withhold a bid because, you know, it exceeds
doesn't make sense.
$1,000.
Yeah, no, but
We want to see the numbers.
It at least gives us an idea for at least somewhere in the ballpark.
Right.
And I think it goes back to what I found over around last year, that you can't bid everything.
All right. Appreciate it. Ed, ready to go?
I think so. You didn't practice this dog and pony show, but we can do it. So, service provider expectations. We've talked about a number of these bullet points, as Luis has mentioned earlier on. You know, this one-time money, we're unlikely to see it again unless, you know, our economy just continues to boom, which is historically not the case. But anyway, so we need to take advantage of the remaining 27 and the 50 million and the whatever that increases to after accessing E-rate and CTF discounts. Provide bids at a special construction one-time install cost up front. I think we've gone over that point well enough. Are there any questions on this particular bullet item? I think we've covered that well enough. As well as the next bullet item, leverage the E-rate second organization order. Timely execution, provide reasonable timelines for installation. So, you know, my biggest comment I wanted to make or point out on this item is if your desktop or best estimate is 180 days to deliver a circuit, you know, please on your response don't put 90 days because, you know, we actually, well, two comments. We use it in the scoring rubric. And, you know, we have to set expectations with our end users. And some of the, you know, principals and assistant superintendents and superintendents can be pretty vocal some of their complaints go right up to the governor's office. So, be honest. It'll make, in your installation estimates, it'll make, the management of expectations for everyone involved a lot easier.
Don't overpromise. I mean, we understand these sites are complex, and they take time. And even big ones. Some of you guys came back and said, we did our best estimate that we could, but there are some things that you can't anticipate. So if there are constraints with permitting, with Caltrans, the forest guys, I mean, we know that the tribes, there's a lot of big issues here. And but we do expect you guys to at least make a very reasonable effort to give us your best installation time, because that's going to be an important factor for us for evaluation.
Two questions about that. One, is it safe to assume that nobody that's involved in this project has spoken to any of the municipalities, the counties, the cities about right-of-way access, permitting fees, expediting, giving the franchise fee permitting fees? Is that, I assume nobody's had those conversations?
That's a Pandora's box, right? I mean, it is a broader issue. I know that there's been we've talked about that with legislators, and it's just really a matter of who wants to take ownership on that. But it is a real issue, coordination of efforts. There's a lot of red tape. That's the bottom line, and we shoot ourselves in the foot in a lot of times as a state, because we have to comply with all these rules and regulations. And
we actually didn't know we needed to speak to the California Coastal Commission about one of the sites. So the answer is sadly no. We did not coordinate that.
Yeah, it's like the story from LAUSD. They have to deal with just one district has to deal with 38 municipalities. So it is, and much of it's AT&T and Verizon, who are the providers out there. But
so then, when I was looking at the timeline, the goal is to have these circuits up. Was it July 1st, 2016, or 2017?
As soon as possible, as we install contracts. We want to move as soon as possible.
Some providers have an early turn-up document or something similar. You may have something similar. If we need to sign that, we will sign that and process it just to get going and get you going. And there's no reason to wait. We'll start the deployment process.
We've obviously considered the risk of these builds not being rate funded. So that would, make sure that you guys are made whole. So that's a factoring that we have to consider as we get all the bids in place.
And have you guys considered, you already have in place, some type of vendor penalty? Since you're going off a scoring matrix, it's inherent to try to drop your lowest installation time frame and run that risk?
I'm surprised a provider was willing to ask that question, but
you have him sit there.
But obviously we've had discussions about obviously we've had discussions about liquidated damages, and I think everyone in this room that's in this industry understands there are positives and negatives to that. We chose not to be that specific and put specific penalties in place.
We did put some language there about reasonableness and that kind of stuff. Part of the struggle that we have is that you want to find a balance. If you get too strict on the side of that spectrum, then providers probably won't bid. So.
No, I get that, but if you're scoring it that way, your matrix is based on you may or may miss this because you've gone a month over somebody else, and that vendor has been known to toss out some pretty early dates and come in 6 or 7 months later. Then there's a little bit of that.
Yeah, but by then decisions have been made, awards have been made, and it's not a whole lot you can do about it. But what is interesting, what I was thinking about is, as you were talking, is about 3 to 5 years ago, Scenic was dealing with about 4, maybe 5 service providers across the state for all the K-12 HSN node sites. I don't know the exact number, but I think we've jumped up to about 12 or 13 suddenly since the BIIG process started last year. We have a lot more smaller regional, service providers that submitted bids, and so it's changed the landscape a little bit. So in other words, I think my point is that, what we've seen and what has occurred historically in years past may not even apply, today, since we have such a much larger number of service providers. The next two bullet items are kind of...
You have another question.
Ed, before we jump off that point, I was wondering, is there, would there be an ability this round, upon award, to also get point of contact for the site at the same time? Because just when I think of installation timelines, I think of that's the first thing. Because then while the contract's being worked, there's some things that can get rolling. There's some permit, and usually it's permits, usually it's that. And if we had a point of contact and we could start doing some of that background work, that would really cut some time.
Nathan, right?
Yes.
That's a great point. One of the things that, one of our big lessons learned is that we, when I say we, K2HSN, Scenic, is we are looking at strengthening the whole project management team internally to be able to deal with a lot of these issues and try to support you better. Part of the problem with local contacts that we experienced in the first round is that they just don't know. Really, these guys just don't know what's going on. They don't understand the importance of this. In some cases, one of our big issues that we had is your teams, your installation teams were showing up to the schools unannounced, and they weren't welcome. And so there is a lot of moving parts to this. We want to make sure we are highly coordinated, and that's a point we'll take. I think what we want to do is think about how we can get you guys the information that you need right off the bat to minimize those things.
So dovetail into that question, as these are fairly remote, one of the questions I had asked me is, can we roll a truck and go run a site survey to look at these specific sites prior to bidding on it so we can really get a more accurate cost structure? And is that something we can schedule to have somebody go out and do a walk around, drive by, whatever, so we can at least make an honest evaluation versus a desktop estimate to really understand and get both you and us an accurate cost for construction getting into these sites? And is that something we can schedule through you guys to, then make appointment with the
sure.
school?
Once the award is made, definitely.
I'm talking now.
Oh, prior to.
Like next week, somebody drive by and go look at it.
Well, if you're just driving by, you can drive by, that's fine. It's the moment you try to knock on the door and get in.
Right. But we could have somebody go out and at least do a drive-by and take a look around and understand where holes and trenches and all that kind of stuff.
Well, this goes back to my point that we highlighted here in red. Work with your local teams.
Yep, exactly.
We saw a lot of the account teams that serve Scenic is it might be a different account team that is that's servicing that area or that district. And we found there was just a disconnect there, and it could have helped solve. In fact, we lost some sites that have to withdraw because the bids weren't accurate. So as best as you guys can, to your ability, really work with your local account teams because they know where where the stuff is buried. They're the ones that actually know all this stuff.
And that's what I'm trying to accommodate is some of these are up to where there's nothing there today, so we've got to have somebody go look at it. So.
And I think it's reasonable to expect that we can make an effort to coordinate access to the school if it's something that will provide a viable.
Okay.
This pool is going to be a little different because there are some districts that have staff, but in round one, a whole lot of the applicants that are making it through, they have no technical staff. If we don't coordinate with the County Office of Ed that provides them support, someone shows up and asks questions that nobody on the facility can answer.
Absolutely, understood, and that's why I'm trying to coordinate it ahead of time so we have the right people talking to the right people on the other end, and so they can go take a look and figure out how far we actually have to go to get in here.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to piggyback on two things. One, with the account team, I understand that, is Nathan's point about point of contact, because someone will have to put that on the order. So we just need that. If we can get that before contact.
Yeah, there are a number of lessons that we all learned, including, scenic and K-12 HSN folks from last year. So that certainly being one of them is to provide local site contacts immediately or as quickly as possible after circuit awards are made.
And I mean, we have the part of the application that we don't have to hound this information. In some cases, the local contact will not be a school contact. It may be a district contact or a county office contact.
So one last point to this gentleman's point. So if to do due diligence a little bit deeper than maybe just driving by, are you guys going to develop a process to share with us to engage you, or it doesn't sound like there is one right now, so we all have the same playing field. Well, we all have the same ability to come to you and say we would like to, if possible, coordinate, or are we just...
No, we'll make sure you have a clear communication.
Okay, just so we're all, following the same procedure. I think that's
Absolutely.
more for your benefit.
Right. I think that the challenge here is that we really are two different organizations. We're coordinating the grant process, and we have the K-12, and the scenic is helping us coordinate the technical. Scenic is the consortium lead for E-rate purposes. And so really all the technical questions, in my mind, so I'm kind of seeing it from the perspective of the audience, right? The service provider, the audience, really you should be engaging with scenic, because ultimately scenic will be your customer, right? And so we support scenic behind the scenes. In fact, we're part of some of their listservs in terms of how the communication is coming, so we get to see it do that.
Let me digress for 2 minutes or so, even though we've been at this for about an hour and 36 minutes. But just, for the benefit of everyone else in the room who may not be aware of how scenic and what scenic is, just real quickly. So scenic is a nonprofit 501c3. We are owned and managed both by the segments that we serve. And the segments that scenic serves is, the K-12 community, the community colleges, all 23 CSU campuses, and some satellite campuses, all 10 UC campuses, and some ancillary sites, and Stanford, Caltech, and USC, and then more recently, the public library. So, scenic is essentially funded and managed by those educational segments that we serve. And K-12 HSN is part of scenic, part and parcel of scenic. So that's kind of the business kind of relationship, if you will, or the organizational relationship for those who may not have been aware of that.
A few points in this slide before we leave. One of our lessons learned too, as Ed mentioned, this expanded the number of service providers that scenic is used to working. And so I think one lesson learned that we do want as we move forward is it's a clear process for communication, and making sure that you factor in that we expect to have regular calls, talk about status, and then a clear escalation process. We do want to understand how we escalate if there's issues that aren't moving beyond the expected time frames. And this goes back to time is of essence. Time is of essence for us.
Yeah, that's actually what I was going to comment on, so no need to add much to that. Other than to say, it really helps with managing expectations out there. I've been embarrassed a few times because I wasn't able to tell my K-12 HSN colleagues, what the status of the circuit is, because I haven't gotten it from, the service provider, and of course, and then they're embarrassed because they have to respond to a superintendent who's complaining to, someone in Sacramento. So, yeah, if, moving forward, since I expect BIIG 2 this year to be, even more work and than it was the first time around. Really like to schedule some regular, ongoing status calls, not just with one person, and not everyone uses a project manager. Sometimes, have to work through a salesperson or someone else, but if you can get the right 2 or 3 people on ongoing status calls, that would really help everyone involved. So.
And if there's a process already that because you work already with scenic, you just piggyback on that cost. You're not asking.
Procurement process, not a whole lot to say, I don't think, about this. You know, it's the E-rate procurement process, fair, open bidding process. That's why everything is done the way it's done with Form 470s and an associated RFP and, you know, and this bidders conference and et cetera, et cetera. There's nothing unusual about the E-rate procurement process.
Well, the bidders conference is a little unusual, but you know,
Well, it is but we felt a real strong need to, you know, educate the community as much as possible in terms of philosophy and, you know, intent and goals, and of course, you know, people in the audience want to know that. So Scenic will, you know, since we filed the Form 470, as has been mentioned before, will be. Since we are lead, Scenic will file is the actual applicant, and will file the Form 471, plural 471s, with USAC and the SLD. And I think, can you think of anything else?
Well,
that
I
you
think
want to touch
here
on
the last point is, obviously, you know, we're looking, you know, last year we had a couple of bids from providers that don't necessarily participate in E-rate. So we would consider them. Obviously, they're not, you know, favored with the scoring rubric because, you know, but these were the only providers. So that's a possibility out there. The provider doesn't have to spend money for it. Certainly, they just don't. They don't have the same odds, right? Because we're trying to leverage it. But
I wanted to mention something. Last year, first time we did this, there were, I think, 3 providers whose bids came in late. And we really needed and wanted to award some circuit pseudo-service providers, but couldn't do so, again, because of the entire E-rate procurement process and rules and what have you. So whether, and I'm not saying we will, whether or not December 4th ends up being the final deadline, or there may or may not be an extension, I don't know. I don't think that there will be. We're hoping not to have to do so. You know, do your best, and even if it's a partial bid, that's better than, you know, not being able to consider any bids from one of you folks out there in the audience than, you know, being late and not being able to consider, you know, the bids that you have been able to complete.
okay. So again, deadline there, and Exhibit D, I think it's important for us not to receive a locked file. It's going to be provided, the exact Excel template is provided to you, and we expect the pricing to be able to come in Excel, because then what we do is we get, you know, gather all that information, and then we compile it so that we kind of see all the bids.
Yes, I think don't delete the rows that you don't bid on. Okay, I think some of you may have a hard
okay,
lesson
thank you.
last year, that even if, because I think how many lines are there? 600 on there, and so there are many sites that you may not bid on. But please just, you can highlight the ones that you're bidding on, but don't delete rows.
It just makes it so much easier for the evaluation team, and just to copy and paste and be able to go through this much more quickly.
Is there an easier way to just leave it blank if you're not going to bid on that?
Yeah.
Yes, just leave it, just do that, exactly that.
But if you delete rows, then we have to figure out which row you delete. Yeah.
Trying to merge them back together is when the problem ensues, yes.
Do we get docked in the scoring if we delete rows?
Maybe just you.
Yeah, can I fill yours out for you?
I can delete row 1, 2, 3, forward.
So there's an email address there, and there's several folks there that.
So this is a scoring rubric. It was put together after careful thought and consideration with a number of team members on the K-12 and Scenic side. It's pretty self-explanatory. Obviously, consistent with E-rate rules, circuit cost has to be the most heavily weighted, which it is in this case. So unless there are specific questions, we just wanted to present it and let you know that we have a systematic means and way to approach looking at bids, especially if they're close or similar.
Yeah.
And I'm also going to throw in that there is a state system, the RFP, that you may just bid, award to low price only. That is also an option. So that it's either or, it's either low price only or in some cases using the rubric.
Can I ask a question on the customer premise equipment one more, or are we coming back to that?
Go ahead.
Now or never.
Now or never? We hand an Ethernet handoff to the school, and that's a sales guy talking, non-technical guy.
Yeah.
But that gets handed off to a switch or router that the school is going to maintain or manage, or is that something that you're looking for us potentially to provide? And is that going to be very clearly defined in the RFP?
Well, I think what we need is, the school needs to, once you provide a connection, it's probably going to connect to a firewall for them, or a LAN switch.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be their LAN switch. So we need something there. In some cases, your fiber terminates into some equipment that may not talk Ethernet, right? So we need an Ethernet handle. That's why we put that CPE equipment, so that there's that clear. But you might be already doing that. It just really depends if it's a different. So what we want is a clear handoff.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, 'cause I'm not technical either, but you were asking if their LAN switch would also have to be managed?
No.
And we say no, not.
I mean, normally we have a NID, and we hand off the Ethernet handoff to the customer, and we're done.
Yeah, this isn't new, right? This is
Right.
This is the same the same kind of CP, the same rule that's been in effect for a while.
Oh, yeah. Point of clarification, being the technical guy. Optical handoff okay, or do we need electrical handoff to the premise?
Optical. Well, the way we've designed it is we provide both, right? Yeah.
And does it need to be color aware? I mean, because if we come in with wavelengths, which is going to be our lower cost solution, the equipment's going to have to be able to read colored signal coming in versus something that's just an IEEE handoff.
You said we don't want to deal with colors, and we want Ethernet. Copper is good if it's a fiber, multi-mode, connection. Something that's really standard out there.
Yeah, single mode fiber, but it's still, the challenge is the equipment catching would have to be different for an Ethernet private line as compared to a wavelength. So it sounds like we may need to accommodate.
Well, I think we got a list a little bit late last year of the handoffs for, at least we did the circuits we were awarded, the handoffs, and I'm assuming the other service providers did as
It was
well.
a chicken and egg thing. We didn't know what you guys could provide, and then we had to figure out. Because we were trying to figure out, we were trying to spec what equipment we needed to receive your handoff. So what we ended up doing when we placed orders for equipment is we purchased a Metro switch and we put it with a single mode, a multi-mode, and just so that we can make sure we could cater to whatever you guys would offer.
That's really what I was trying to verify, is what you got catching on the other end, so we come in with something you can catch.
Right. But you see, this was the first round. We purchased the CPE equipment.
Right, and now you're looking at us adding the CPE if possible.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Other questions? I think we've covered everything on this slide.
So cloud aggregation strategies, I think this talks a little about your service offering. So typically, what you saw the hierarchy. Usually it's a point-to-point, school to district office. Certainly, if there's an aggregation strategy that you could propose, there are some districts that like having one connection from all their districts and the provider doing the aggregation for them. So that's something that at least we flagged from, we spoke to schools that are on this list of saying, how do you prefer to receive all these connections from your participating schools? So we tag those in there for consideration. Okay, so that way you can say, okay, I have a product that can offer aggregation, or I want to offer point-to-point. You can offer both. So as we make the evaluation. But I think this probably rings true for charter schools because, again, charters are are really just, we have you'll see one, and I'll just point to this example. It's near charter, and they are a charter school with, technically from the state perspective, it's only one school because they only have one school identification. But behind that, they have about 60 sites across the state, all over the state. Not all the sites are in because they didn't apply for all the sites, but I think what they have, like 30 sites.
I think it's
18, 19 sites. So what we're looking is, can one of you guys, as you put your bids, aggregate that traffic and send one connection to the charter main office, and then from the charter main office connect to one of the aggregation.
And you'll specify if that's the preferred method
Yes.
or what? Okay.
That is correct. So you'll see that in Exhibit D. We'll walk you through Exhibit D a little further, but we just want to make sure that clarification point, because last year we were really more focused on point-to-point. In some cases, it didn't service point. Kathy, this slide is about dark fiber, and I think these are some of the things we're looking at in terms of dark fiber. I think we mentioned this, lit fiber services are the preferred technology over dark. But again, we're going to entertain dark if that's an option we have. And these are some guidelines there that you'll see within the RFP we're looking for. This is for, if this is going to be a self-provision network, this is what we would look. This obviously wouldn't apply for IRU or...
Correct. So from our discussion with scenic engineers, for an IRU, we're just looking for single strand. This is the minimum 12 strand would be for a new build for essentially a private network. But again, scenic would only be lighting 2 of the strands
Initially.
initially.
I think we beat this one to death. But point of clarification here, I think is if there's equipment on the collector side, for CPU bundle services, let's make sure you include that as well.
That answered some of the question I asked earlier. Right, sorry I didn't wait.
That's okay. Questions? You didn't notice you had a slide about this, right? All good. Supersedure process, I think we've also talked about this. We'll highly coordinate that in terms of who's going to supersede and when, but part of it is we are trying to, what we did say in the first round is we would at least cover 1 year of operational expense. We just need to see within what year that's going to fall. In some cases, we're just going to have to fund either more time so that we do it in the next C-rate cycle, or sometimes it's going to be a little shorter than a year to align with.
So is Scenic the ordering customer for all of these, or in some cases it's going to be that will be the initial case?
Scenic will be the customer that orders everything and coordinates everything until it's installed. Once it's installed, it's superseded to the school district.
First billing will go to scenic,
Yes,
right? At
right.
least
maybe 6 months to a year.
And we can make separate billing accounts for Scenic or whatever to break out different stuff, so it's easier to break it apart later. So just trying to think about
Comes
how
back up to the contracting language and how you want to set it up.
Yeah.
In some cases, some providers already have a master service agreement with Scenic. It could be an addendum.
Okay. Just trying to make sure we get the right people, the right bill at the right time.
So these are the main exhibits of the RFP. A, B, C are pretty self-explanatory. I think that Exhibit B, unless you're proposing to go to a scenic aggregation site, you would require Exhibit B, but for the most part, we're not encouraging that. And obviously, you would need Exhibit A in order to obtain Exhibit B. But for the most part, you would only really need Exhibit D to the work that you need to do. So, really not a whole. So let's go to Exhibit D, and we'll probably do this collectively. You can kind of see. So If you look at Exhibit D, this is an Excel sheet. It'll be it's embedded in the PDF, right? That's how we're doing it now?
I think they're individual now. I didn't log online.
It was separate.
But
It's a separate Excel file.
it's separate by itself now.
Excel file. So basic stuff, your service provider name, your SPIN number. Please note here if you're a provider for CTF, this is the California Teleconnect Fund. And so that way, that would provide us 50% discount after the E-rate discount. So some providers may not participate. And then here, estimated taxes. This is which they put it.
Well, last year, every circuit, we were supposed to estimate taxes. We're asking you this time to just tell us a general number instead of on every line.
Because everyone used the same percentage anyway, all the way down on all their quotes, so it had minimal value to ask them individually.
Give an estimated percentage of taxes. Okay.
Yeah, right. Last year we had that field in where we asked them. A lot of noise, and it was the same.
It was 5% put in, 5% vote out. Okay.
So what you'll see here is you'll see a location. So each school site will be a row. You're seeing a site ID. Now the big two sites, this new round, they don't have a site ID yet. We assigned an ID until we know which ones are moving forward. There's no sense in us assigning an ID. Some sites will have an ID, and those are the ones that were part of the first round.
Carryover.
They're the carryover sites, exactly. It's a great term. You'll see the basic information, the A location, the zip code, the county. Again, you can always, put, if you want, a filter, by this row, and then you can start filtering columns. If you want to focus on the, sites in Alameda County or Contra Costa, that'll help you with your navigating the sheet.
So there's no, where's the address? Is it somewhere?
I think that's the couple columns they have hidden right now because D and E are currently covered up on the. Well, no, you can just
It's all at work, right?
I was starting to sweat myself.
All right.
Here.
Life is good.
Yeah, so you'll have the A address, the zip location, the county. You'll have the district. We provided the lats and the longs. So one of the things we did this year is we plotted everything on a map, and we had somebody actually look at the maps and see if the pin was where a school resembled. We verified places where some gave us a P.O. box, and we don't want to send fiber connection to a P.O. box. And there were some cases where the district data center was not at the district office. So we had to do a lot of those types of verifications. Again, things we learned from BIIG 1.
So do you have those plotted already? Can you send a KMZ file?
If you want, upon request, we can send things.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Priority site, again, this tells you which priority you fall under, priority 1, 2, 3, 2B. So if you want to stay focused on the first priorities, that's fine. Tells you which round of BIIG that this might be useful or not. This is the preferred technology. We just specify cloud technology. If it doesn't say anything, it's safe to assume that most likely it's point-to-point. But again, just by the fact that we say that doesn't mean you can't bid on point-to-point. If you want to take the time and bid cloud and point-to-point and several speeds, that's up to you. It's really just to make sure that you at least know what we're looking for these strengths. Okay. This is the type, so this would allow you to filter, when it says school, this is an actual school site. If it's district, this is the district office, and then if it's charter school, you'll be able to filter those. And then you see the school enrollment. So if you see a district, you'll see the aggregate enrollment for the district. If you see a school, it will be the enrollment for that school site. We go to the Z location, and then you'll see Z location address. As you can see, if we, there were probably a handful of sites that we weren't able to fully validate the Z location, and so you might see a site that is listed twice with a different Z location. So we were just not sure where we didn't have enough time.
I think there's only
maybe a couple,
two
or three. So don't be alarmed if you see 2 Z locations. It's just that we weren't at the time sure. We just needed to get this information posted. So going back where you'll probably spend a lot of your time in the next few weeks is you'll see columns like these. 100 megabits dedicated point-to-point. and then you'll see the non-recurring special construction costs, other non-recurring costs, your number of days for installation, what the monthly recurring cost, and we're asking specifically 5-year pricing, and then with the CPE, with the bundle, and then without the CPE. So either or of those would be, or both.
So you have contracts in place from last year. Would you consider just moving forward with, well, I guess not.
No, we don't have contracts with last year. These are all sites that,
Right. Yeah, my question can be crossed out.
With one exception, there are places that we awarded wireless work
yes,
to.
yes.
And so some of those people, because that to us is not a permanent solution, those sites may be listed again.
Okay.
And we have worked on them in 1.0. But that, there's just...
True, very true, yeah. So in that case, if we do find, in this round, we find a more favorable solution for them, we might consider looking at that solution. So dedicated point-to-point, so 100 megabit switched Ethernet or service provider cloud aggregation. So if you have a specific product here that might be able to serve those purposes. Now again, I think here one of the caveats is if you are going to do cloud services in your monthly pricing, you need to make sure you include the cost of the collector circuit. If there are any costs to the other side. So it has to have both sides, right? Because we can't have is, the cost for the A location, and then, afterwards we find out, oh, there's a cost for C location. So that's probably not. Then what you'll see is for other speeds, 1 gig switched, 10 gig switched, and then you'll see, dark fiber, long-term single gig.
Long-term leases are still just only 5 years?
For dark fiber, I think it's 20. It's 20 years, and then on the MNO, I think we do have 5-year contracts. So your MNO, if you see O&M, that would be every 5 years, and you can specify that in your response. That's clearly outlined in the RFP, right?
It is. It's in the specifications. Can't remember what section. Exactly.
Right. And then if none of these, you feel that none of these fall, these offerings fall within what you consider would be appropriate, then you would use this column right here. Okay? So in here, we would ask that you specify the speed, and if it's, if it's wireless or if it's whatever, colors, or, So if and you can use multiple of these. If you have a need to do more, what we would encourage you to do is copy those columns and just paste them and put, whatever solutions you find. But just keep going that way. That way we know. Now, if you see this worksheet, it has 3 tabs on the bottom. It has K-12 all sites. So this sheet has the 598 sites. Okay, you're going to respond to these all here based on these solutions. What we did here is we separated the charters that we were exclusively looking for some potential aggregation strategies. So we did this to keep you kind of focused. It's kind of a pre-filter here. It's the same list of sites. It's a subset of the sites on the All K-12. So if you responded on the All K-12 and it includes a charter, if you don't feel compelled, then you need to do it twice, as long as it's in one place. Okay?
Let me add right there, too. In cycle 1, we found out that even though districts might be the charter authorizer of charter schools, they didn't want to take those circuits. In a lot of cases, the charter schools didn't want to go to those districts that authorized them. So before finalizing this list, we've actually done a manual outreach and asked, will you take this? And so if there's a district listed for a charter, they have said they will take it. And in most cases, it's not a district, it's a COE.
A dynamic in charter schools is not uncommon that they don't get along with the district because they might be perceived as taking their enrollment and competing against the school district. So be aware there are those sensitivities out there, and So just because a district is chartered by a school district doesn't mean that we need to send their circuit dip out. I not get that. Question?
For some of these, this is going to sound crazy, for some of these schools with very little enrollment, for some of us service providers that might already have facilities, can we bid less than the 100 meg if we can do Ethernet over copper and help the school out?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So,
where would we put that response?
and the other,
Okay.
remember we went to all the way to the end here. You would specify which, absolutely. That's why we provided the enrollment.
If it turns out to be $20,000 a student to build a 100 meg connection over fiber, then maybe at least there's something we can recommend.
Exactly.
Okay. All right.
Put 50 meg or something in.
As long from our perspective, they can scale. You know, because bandwidth is just growing exponentially. We're seeing growth of 100% every year, and so it's not uncommon to see that. And so I think that
Talk about Shasta Elementary,
Shasta.
the video, the 1.5 megs to.
Oh, Shasta. Yeah, we just got connected. We connected one of the schools for BIIG 1, and they had a T1, 1.5 megabits. And this following day, the circuit came up. One of the teachers asked the students. They had Chromebooks already, so they lit up the Chromebooks in the school. And just in that morning, the network connection was already running at 30.
19 students on their Google Chromebooks, everybody accessing an assignment the teacher gave them. 19 students used 30 megs.
So for the 1.5, they just all of a sudden, boom, we're using 30 megs. Just kind of
All the kids said, "Oh, we don't have to wait like we used to."
It's like magic.
That's right.
a really, really compelling video. They recorded this video. It's really nice to see the kids so excited about it. And then what we did here is in the fiber build tab, what you'll see is these are the 45 sites that we talked about in the bids. And so
It's sad when they're called Old Ghost Road.
we have a school called Bogus Elementary.
But you're in Death Valley, right? That's on here, so you got
Both those
some of those things like that.
Right. So here, basically, what we did is we just more specifically called the minimum 12 strands, and then we separated the M and O here. So if you're considering for these no-bid sites, this is how we would like you to put this one in. So if you're only going to do dark fiber and concentrate on these sites, you could use this tab. One other point I wanted to note, going back to Mike's question, if you do propose something alternate, if you propose like a point-to-point wireless microwave type solution, for example, we would and it's in the RFP language, but what we would want to see is a brief description of what the service offering entails. So, for example, in wireless, we want to know if you're using licensed frequencies, potential number of hops from point A to point Z, and things that, some of the technical specifications behind the solution so that it can help us make those decisions that we're about.
Is the assumption that if a district has multiple locations, that all those locations will go to the
Service for one service?
Yeah.
Not necessarily.
Yeah. So then if you are going by an individual site and you want to do some form of cost efficiency, where do you want that noted? So where, it might be $70,000 to get to both sites, or one site $12,000 to another. If you got both of them, you might waive all.
Right.
So how do you want that
I think one of the things we discussed was saying an alternate worksheet. Is that where we landed?
So, and then anywhere where you feel like obviously there are a lot of services that have to be evaluated in a short amount of time, and so that's the reason why we've been pretty rigid with the Exhibit D. But I think that any time you can illustrate information like that as far as cost savings, or please either put it in a footnote or make a note at the top of the
Or what if they
worksheet.
put another column in the worksheet, you know, to say, you know,
I think-
option B
That'd be
pricing,
difficult.
you know, for example.
To try to tile those. If you could footnote it, that would be.
Or highlighting.
Yeah, if you could footnote, say, site
Rows.
line,
Yeah.
line 17, 18, 19, if all taken, would be zero cost.
Right, exactly, and just put a footnote at the end and maybe indicate it with like a highlighting a color on the tab. You know, anything other than changing the, you know, deleting rows, we don't want deleting rows or columns, but yeah, that's welcome to get any additional information.
Because there's some of these where the only way it makes sense is to get into this building and then hit all three of them that are across the street.
Right.